All right.
I have a little hand.
Are you going to raise your hand to get everybody's attention now?
No, it just floats around the screen. They're right in your head.
All right. Since clearly we have to keep you focused, why don't you tell us who you are and how you got to be here?
So within the society, my name is Alienor FitzHenry, and I'm from Owertha. And I started with the society in Owertha in the early 2000s, like 2001, 2002, in that range. And it was quite a lot of fun. There were lots of craft things to get involved with, different service opportunities. I mundanely am an engineer, so I have a very structured outlook on the world, and was important to me that I move through activities in a way that I could get both feedback and feel like I was making an impact around me. So I kind of threw myself into quite a lot of teaching because it was fun to share my love of fiber activities with other people. I threw myself into quite a few of the officer positions because I'm an engineer and I'm a little bit bossy. So this was a way for me to become involved and meet people. And I'm also a horrible introvert. So I was also sort of my personal nightmare to have to deal quite so publicly with people. So that was my early introduction to society. My husband was a member before I was. In 2008, Titus and Ellis by Laurel, and my Pell was, I think it was a year afterwards. I'd have to look that one up. So I'm a lapel, Laurel, and then Pell.
And do you have any other peerages beyond those two?
I'm a Viscountess.
There you go.
Yes, that one too.
I mean, as long as we're doing things with the goal oriented, we have to cover the whole spectrum, right?
That one wasn't as much a goal. I mean, he obviously enjoyed the fighting, and it was like, oh, what just happened here?
Fair enough. So, I mean, one, thank you for coming out and speaking to us tonight. Obviously, you don't speak for the entirety of the Laurels. You don't speak for Laurels across the whole world, nor the whole West Kingdom, nor even Owertha. But we do appreciate you coming out to give us your perspective and your experiences on going through and doing things. So if you had some top tier advice, what would your top pieces of advice for somebody who wants to be very dedicated and head down a specific Laurel path? Their goal is to become worthy of a Laurel. What would be your bits of advice for them?
So first of all, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with saying, I would like to be a Laurel. I think where people get into trouble is they say, I would like to be a Laurel of Florentine embroidery from the 13th century. And there comes a point in your path where that's certainly a possibility that you've narrowed it down, but to just sit back from the very beginning and go, that's it, because you're going to make, you're going to have different interests and you'll discover things as you go along the way. So that may or may not change, but just intrinsically, the idea that it's okay to say, I want to do this someday. I want to be a Laurel. So that's one. Two, I think it's very important to ask for relevant feedback from your peer, from your counsel, or frankly, just from dudes on the street. If that's if your art is feeding people, then just people you've fed random, they don't have to be a peer, to say, yeah, that was really tasty, or oh my God, I've never considered liver in that manner. But relevant feedback is super important. And if you're not getting that from your peer or from your peers with a small p, then something to sit back and ask yourself, how can I fill this void?
Okay. Obviously you come from an engineering background. Have you felt, there's sort of the debate in the world about STEM versus STEAM, or transitioning from STEM to STEAM. Do you find that your engineering background is helpful? And if so, in what ways?
So I find it helpful in that I need a structured checklist, if you will. So it's important to me you do A before you do B and C. And when I was learning to spin. My Laurel is in fiber arts. You know, the traditional path is, okay, I learned to spin wool, and I learned to spin wool in a multiple. First you spin it fast and lumpy because that's just how it works, and then you spin it fine, more fine, and eventually you make really, really fine thread. Okay, that's cool, that's wool, but to demonstrate a mastery, we also have to be able to spin silk, and silk comes in a multitude of different widths, and or some of the like hemp or linen, less exciting, I guess, is what we'll say. Those are not as fun to spin. They're dirty and kind of, I can see why you do it in period where it was necessary. I don't see why you would do it now for fun. But to be able to work through those in an organized manner was kind of key for me.
Okay. And you mentioned that, you know, your natural state is being a little bit introverted. Do you find that it's difficult to get your work out there, or did you find that it was difficult to get your work out there? Or were there ways that made it easier for you?
So from the advice I got from my peer, and I think that moves forward to really anybody, whether you have a peer or not, is the three stools of the Laurel, if you will, are doing the thing, you know, making your craft, teaching it, and then documenting it. And for me, documenting it was the hardest of the three. Teaching was not that big a deal. You could teach at an event, or you could teach at a collegium. Certainly, I think it's easier now with the Zoom options we have. You can get a much broader exposure. I wasn't going to be able to teach people in Central West if I didn't travel there quite regularly. But with Zoom, you know, you have that reach, or even East Kingdom, Drakenwald, that kind of thing. The making was fun, and I would say just never pass up an opportunity to show off your stuff, whether that's pictures or, you know, laying it out on the table. It's difficult to you know, lay it all out there for feedback, but at the same time, you're going to meet some interesting people. And as an introvert, having this ready-made conversation piece there, so you don't have to go through the awkwardness of, hey, what's your name? You know, because ultimately, like, look at the thing I made. And you can be excited about that without having to dwell on all of the social niceties. For me, but again, the documentation was the hardest. And I think the hump for me was it didn't have to be a collegiate level paper every time. It's totally adequate to say, you know, write 2 paragraphs and go, I did the thing. In period, they would have used, well, they would have used urine to scour the fleece. I used Tide because urine didn't seem like it was going to be effective in my small apartment collecting urine. So I used Tide, but we didn't get the fleece, and then I went and I spun it. So, you know, you're going to talk about, this is what I did, this is what they would have done in period, and here's how we differentiated what I did and why. I mean, ultimately, as long as you have a good reason for why you did something out of period, then it's fine. There's a time and a place for those epic research papers, but I don't think it's on your average contest, maybe that you're entering at a baronial level.
One of the things that I know you work on with your apprentices, or something, I think you call it their apprentice books.
Yes.
Would that be a way for people to be able to get their information out there?
Absolutely. And again, engineer, so I like to keep a record of what I'm doing. And I do have an apprentice book here. It's simply a 3-ring binder. And as we talked about, we have our—
Can we get it up a little bit higher so it's in front of the camera? There we go.
Can we see? So this is a copy of an apprentice book, and this is an older one, but there's 3 little tabs. It says I'm doing, I'm teaching, and then there's just some pictures of the project, because obviously this is the documentation. So every time Miss Georgia did a thing or entered a thing, she wrote a little, there's her write-up associated. She was a potter. These were contest entries or projects she was working on. Later on, here's a list of where she was teaching. And some of these have formal handouts, and some of them are just a sign-in list or pictures from the class. And then at the end, there were just, you know, here's some different projects that didn't necessarily have a write-up or a specific purpose. There were commissions that she was working on, or that kind of thing. So for me, this was a way to both keep track of what we were doing, but in Owertha particularly, where we're very spread out, it's important for the other Laurels who aren't going to necessarily be able to see their work to be able to, or touch it, you know, to be able to look at, hey, what's, in this case, Anna Marie working on for the last 6 months. So my apprentices update their Laurel books before the 2 coronets, and then if anybody from the council asks, I can whip it out and be like, hey, this is what they're working on. And I think that's a good way, especially if you're remote. I know some of the northern baronies in particular there in central have a hard time getting down, so it's a good way to interact. And obviously we have the classrooms now as well, and all the same information would be posted there, but not everybody's comfortable in the classroom, so the little 3-ring binder just gives us an option.
Are there, so obviously the unreached wouldn't have access to their own classrooms, obviously. Would putting that sort of information online in some sort of format also be helpful?
You know, I've got one apprentice who likes to work exclusively through a blog, and in that case, for the apprentice book, we could print out the blog, or we could just direct people to go and read her WordPress, and absolutely, or Facebook. There was another fella who did his, who had just posted his projects to his SCA facing Facebook page, and that was good too. I think anything that gets your work out and available for viewing is a good thing. Like I said, Georgia was a potter, and one of the pieces of feedback she received at one point was about edges not being quite thin enough early in her journey. So she went through a period where she was working on that and documenting it. And obviously the potters, that we didn't have any other potters here in Ortha, the potters who were looking at her work needed a way to be able to see that improvement without having the piece in their hand where they could hold it or look at her drink from it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. All right, I got one for you that's kind of a hot topic that was lighting up Facebook a few days ago. It was sort of looking at the importance of long range multi-step projects, things like sheep to shawl projects. Obviously, sheep to shawl would be very fiber specific, but there are other regions where you could see that. How important is it having that level of breadth and layers as people are starting to get a path going forth? Do you see that as something that's important? Do you see it as less important? What are your feelings on that?
So I like the idea of a capstone project, if you will. I don't know that it's strictly necessary. If you have one of the people who was recently elevated has been playing for 30 years, and she certainly had a breadth of experience that just one project wouldn't have been able to match. When I did it, I did a capstone project. It was a sheep to shawl. Well, it was a sheep to capelet. I actually, you know, scoured the fleece over the campfire, and I've spun it all up and wove it on the loom. And that was my capstone project, if you will. And it has a place, certainly, but I think there's lots of people who don't necessarily need that as well.
That's going to vary subject to subject and candidate to candidate.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
You know, I don't think every art or science lends itself to the concept or maybe is necessary. And I don't think that every candidate needs to display. I came to my Laurel fairly quickly. It was about 5 years, which seems to be quick compared to some. And the lady that was Laurel with me at the same time had been working on hers for 22 years. So what she needed to show the council, what I needed to show the council were very different.
Mm-hmm.
It's another tool in your arsenal. I mean, if it's something you want to do, then by all means do it. If you'd rather do a whole bunch of little stuff, that's, you know, equally relevant.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on collaborative projects?
I think collaborative projects are a lot of fun, and you know, that you both get something out of that. I would not make, if my goal were to be a Laurel, I don't think I would do exclusively collaborative projects, because I think that makes it difficult to demonstrate my mastery over the particular topic. But I think that exploring it as an option gives you access to to the creative process that someone else is using, which could be both exciting and frustrating depending on your personality type and how organized the other person is.
Yeah.
So I would certainly encourage any of my apprentices to absolutely go for a collaborative project.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I look at some of the sheep to shawl type projects that people contemplate, and it seems like a potential fit for me if it's for them, from my perspective for them. It looks like one of those places to get some of those experiences, even if you don't want to do all the pieces yourself.
Sure.
But the idea that it makes it hard to tell whose work it is certainly makes a lot of sense, as well as all the challenges of group projects.
Well, your interest is horses, so if you had a apprentice buddy who wanted to train horses using a specific technique, and then you outfit them in the gear, that will be a collaborative project, and it's complementary, and it's kind of servicing each of your interests.
Mm-hmm.
So we've just exhausted my horse knowledge right there.
We'll quickly move you away from horses. It's okay. So what's probably the most important thing you think you've learned since you were elevated? Because you're now 15 years since elevation.
Wow.
And if coming up with the most important thing on the spot is difficult, how has becoming a Laurel enriched your SCA? If that's an easier question to answer.
I think becoming a Laurel has advantages and disadvantages. It changes how you participate in all of the arts and the sciences. There's this I don't want to say a higher standard, but it's like, oh, you're a Laurel, so probably your largesse should not consist of wood beads unless you've hand carved those. So I sometimes feel like it doesn't give me the freedom to explore crafts way outside my wheelhouse in an elementary manner. Like, you don't necessarily want to put your name on it because it's not at the level of the peerage. But from the opposite side of that is being a Laurel allows you to interact with these different apprentices who are learning and teaching and sharing, kind of exploring their own craft. And there's a lot of enjoyment there in sort of guiding people along, like, hey, have you thought about doing this? And or I might display that in this way. So it's a trade-off, honestly, like anything. Yeah. There is that early meeting way in the morning. So I don't work out there. Again, I think it's really key that you come out of that meeting with meaningful feedback. Elsie, you're doing fine. Keep doing what you're doing. That's not meaningful feedback. Meaningful feedback is, okay, your presentation at 12th night was really awesome, but I think that part of it went over the head of your intended audience, and maybe focus on defining some elementary terms. That's meaningful feedback that you could use. I totally made that up. It's not relevant to what you displayed at 12th night, but
no, but it sounds really good.
I was
totally
trying to
does.
Generic, so
yeah. Are there any questions that I haven't asked you yet that you'd like to answer?
I don't know the answer to that. Not really.
Okay. Well, I've gotten through most of my notes and the things I wanted to talk about with you. So I want to thank you very much for coming and sharing your time and your experience and your opinions with us.
I have many opinions.
And with that, I think I will tell our TA that she can go ahead and turn off the video. And if we've got any questions from the folks who are gathered, we can go ahead and take those once the video's off.